Sphere by Michael Crichton. The Surface. West of Tonga. For a long time, the horizon had been a monotonous flat blue line separating the Pacific Ocean from the sky. The Navy helicopter raced forward, flying low near the waves. Despite the noise and the thumping vibration of the blades, Norman Johnson fell asleep. He was tired. He had been traveling on various military aircraft for more than 14 hours. It was not the kind of thing a 53-year-old professor of psychology was used to. He had no idea how long he slept. When he awoke, he saw that the horizon was still flat. There were white semicircles of coral atolls ahead. He said over the intercom, "What's this?" "Islands of Ninihina and Tafahi," the pilot said. "Technically part of Tonga, but they're uninhabited. Good sleep?" "Not bad." Norman looked at the islands as they flashed by, a curve of white sand, a few palm trees, then gone. The flat ocean again. "Where'd they bring you in from?" the pilot asked. "San Diego," Norman said. "I left yesterday." "So you came Honolulu, Guam, Pongo, here?" "That's right." "Long trip," the pilot said. "What kind of work you do, sir?" "I'm a psychologist," Norman said. "A shrink, huh?" The pilot grinned. "Why not? They've called in just about everything else." "How do you mean?" "We've been ferrying people out of Guam for the last 2 days. Physicists, biologists, mathematicians, you name it. Everybody being flown to the middle of nowhere in the Pacific Ocean." "What's going on?" Norman said. The pilot glanced at him, eyes unreadable behind dark aviator sunglasses. "They're not telling us anything, sir. What about you? What'd they tell you?" "They told me," Norman said, "that there was an airplane crash." "Uh-huh," the pilot said. "You get called on crashes?" "I have been, yes." For a decade, Norman Johnson had been on the list of FAA crash site teams, experts called on short notice to investigate civilian air disasters. The first time had been at the United Airlines crash in San Diego in 1976. Then he had been called to Chicago in 78 and Dallas in 82. Each time the pattern was the same. The hurried telephone call, frantic packing, the absence for a week or more. This time his wife Ellen had been annoyed because he was called away on July 1st, which meant he would miss their July 4th beach barbecue. Then, too, Tim was coming back from his sophomore year at Chicago, on his way to a summer job in the Cascades. And Amy, now 16, was just back from Andover, and Amy and Ellen didn't get along very well if Norman wasn't there to mediate. The Volvo was making noises again, and it was possible Norman might miss his mother's birthday the following week. "What crash is it?" Ellen had said. "I haven't heard about any crash." She turned on the radio while he packed. There was no news on the radio of an airline crash. When the car pulled up in front of his house, Norman had been surprised to see it was a Navy pool sedan with a uniformed Navy driver. "They never sent a Navy car the other times," Ellen said, following him down the stairs to the front door. "Is this a military crash?" "I don't know," he said. "When will you be back?" He kissed her. "I'll call you," he said. "Promise." But he hadn't called. Everyone had been polite and pleasant, but they had kept him away from telephones. First at Hickam Field in Honolulu, then at the Naval Air Station in Guam, where he had arrived at 2 in the morning and had spent half an hour in a room that smelled of aviation gasoline, staring dumbly at an issue of the American Journal of Psychology, which he had brought with him, before flying on. He arrived at Pongo Pongo just as dawn was breaking. Norman was hurried onto the big Sea Knight helicopter, which immediately lifted off the cold tarmac and headed west, over palm trees and rusty corrugated rooftops, into the Pacific. He had been on this helicopter for 2 hours, sleeping part of the time. Ellen and Tim and Amy and his mother's birthday now seemed very far away. "Where exactly are we?" "Between Samoa and Fiji in the South Pacific," the pilot said. "Can you show me on the chart?" "I'm not supposed to do that, sir. Anyway, it wouldn't show much. Right now, you're 200 miles from anywhere, sir." Norman stared at the flat horizon, still blue and featureless. "I can believe it," he thought. He yawned. Don't you get bored looking at that?
To tell you the truth, no, sir, the pilot said. I'm real happy to see it flat like this. At least we've got good weather. And it won't hold. There's a cyclone forming up in the Admiralties. Should swing down this way in a few days.
What happens then?
Everybody clears the hell out. Weather can be tough in this part of the world, sir. I'm from Florida, and I saw some hurricanes when I was a kid, but you've never seen anything like a Pacific cyclone, sir.
Norman nodded. How much longer until we get there?
Any minute now, sir.
After 2 hours of monotony, the cluster of ships appeared unusually interesting. There were more than a dozen vessels of various kinds, formed roughly into concentric circles. On the outer perimeter, he counted 8 gray Navy destroyers. Closer to the center were large ships that had wide-spaced double hulls and looked like floating dry docks, then nondescript boxy ships with flat helicopter decks, and in the center, amid all the gray, 2 white ships, each with a flat pad and a bullseye. The pilot listed them off.
You got your destroyers on the outside for protection. RVS's further in, that's remote vehicle support for the robots. Then MSS, mission support and supply, and OSRVs in the center.
OSRVs?
Oceanographic Survey and Research Vessels.
The pilot pointed to the white ships.
John Hawes to port, and William Arthur to starboard. We'll put down on the Hawes.
The pilot circled the formation of ships. Norman could see launches running back and forth between the ships, leaving small white wakes against the deep blue of the water. All this for an airplane crash? Norman said.
Hey,
the pilot grinned.
I never mentioned a crash. Check your seatbelt if you would, sir. We're about to land.
Barns. The red bullseye grew larger and slid beneath them as the helicopter touched down. Norman fumbled with his seatbelt buckle as a uniformed Navy man ran up and opened the door.
Dr. Johnson? Norman Johnson?
That's right.
Have any baggage, sir?
Just this. Norman reached back, pulled out his day case. The officer took it.
Any scientific instruments, anything like that?
No, that's it.
This way, sir. Keep your head down, follow me, and don't go aft, sir.
Norman stepped out, ducking beneath the blades. He followed the officer off the helipad and down a narrow stairs. The metal handrail was hot to the touch. Behind him, the helicopter lifted off, the pilot giving him a final wave. Once the helicopter had gone, the Pacific air felt still and brutally hot.
Good trip, sir?
Fine.
Need to go, sir?
I've just arrived, Norman said.
No, I mean, you need to use the head, sir.
No, Norman said.
Good. Don't use the heads. They're all backed up.
All right.
Plumbing's been screwed up since last night. We're working on the problem and hope to have it solved soon.
He peered at Norman.
We have a lot of women on board at the moment, sir.
I see, Norman said.
There's a chemical, John, if you need it, sir.
I'm okay, thanks.
In that case, Captain Barnes wants to see you at once, sir.
I'd like to call my family.
You can mention that to Captain Barnes, sir.
They ducked through a door, moving out of the hot sun into a fluorescent-lit hallway. It was much cooler.
Air conditioning hasn't gone out lately, the officer said. At least that's something.
Does the air conditioning go out often?
Only when it's hot.
Through another door, and into a large workroom. Metal walls, racks of tools, acetylene torches spraying sparks as workmen hunched over metal pontoons and pieces of intricate machinery, cables snaking over the floor.
We do ROV repairs here,
the officer said, shouting over the din.
Most of the heavy work is done on the tenders. We just do some of the electronics here. We go this way, sir.
Through another door, down another corridor, and into a wide, low-ceilinged room crammed with video monitors. A half-dozen technicians sat in shadowy half-darkness before the color screens. Norman paused to look.
This is where we monitor the ROVs, the officer said. We've got 3 or 4 robots down on the bottom at any given time, plus the MSBs and the FDs, of course.
Norman heard the crackle and hiss of radio communications, soft fragments of words he couldn't make out. On one screen he saw a diver walking on the bottom. The diver was standing in harsh artificial light, wearing a kind of suit Norman had never seen, heavy blue cloth, and a bright yellow helmet sculpted in an odd shape.
Norman pointed to the screen. "How deep is he?" "I don't know, 1,000, 1,200 feet, something like that." "And what have they found?" "So far, just the big titanium fin." The officer glanced around. "It doesn't read on any monitors now. Bill, can you show Dr. Johnson here the fin?" "Sorry, sir," the technician said. "Present main comm ops is working north of there in Quadrant 7. "Ah, Quad 7's almost half a mile away from the fin," the officer said to Norman. "Too bad. It's a hell of a thing to see. But you'll see it later, I'm sure. This way to Captain Barnes." They walked for a moment down the corridor. Then the officer said, "Do you know the captain, sir?" "No. Why?" "Just wondered. He's been very eager to see you. Calling up the Comtex every hour to find out when you're arriving." "No," Norman said. "I've never met him." "Very nice man." "I'm sure." The officer glanced over his shoulder. "You know, they have a saying about the captain," he said. "Oh, what's that?" "They say his bite is worse than his bark." Through another door, which was marked Project Commander, and had beneath that a sliding plate that said Captain Harold C. Barnes, U.S.N. The officer stepped aside, and Norman entered a paneled stateroom. A burly man in shirt-sleeves stood up from behind a stack of files. Captain Barnes was one of those trim military men who made Norman feel fat and inadequate. In his middle 40s, Hal Barnes had erect military bearing, an alert expression, short hair, a flat gut, and a politician's firm handshake. "Welcome aboard the Hawes, Dr. Johnson. How are you feeling?" "Tired," Norman said. I'm sure. You came from San Diego?" "Yes." "So it's 15 hours, give or take. Like to have a rest?" "I'd like to know what's going on," Norman said. "Perfectly understandable." Barnes nodded. "What did they tell you?" "Who?" "The men who picked you up in San Diego, the men who flew you out here, the men in Guam, whatever." "They didn't tell me anything." "And did you see any reporters, any press?" "No, nothing like that." Barnes smiled. "Good. I'm glad to hear it." He waved Norman to a seat. Norman sat gratefully. "How about some coffee?" Barnes said, moving to a coffee maker behind his desk. And then the lights went out. The room was dark, except for the light that streamed in from a side porthole. "God damn it," Barnes said. "Not again. Emerson! Emerson!" An ensign came in a side door. "Sir, working on it, Captain." "What was it this time?" "Blew out in ROV Bay 2, sir." "I thought we added extra lines to Bay 2. "Apparently they overloaded anyway, sir." "I want this fixed now, Emerson." "We hope to have it solved soon, sir." The door closed. Barnes sat back in his chair. Norman heard the voice in the darkness. "It's not really their fault," he said. "These ships weren't built for the kind of power loads we put on them now, and—" there we are." The lights came back on. Barnes smiled. "Did you say you wanted coffee, Dr. Johnson?" "Black is fine," Norman said. Barnes poured him a mug. "Anyway, I'm relieved you didn't talk to anybody. In my job, Dr. Johnson, security is the biggest worry, especially on a thing like this. If word gets out about this site, we'll have all kinds of problems. And so many people are involved now. Hell, Sync Compact didn't even want to give me destroyers until I started talking about Soviet submarine reconnaissance. The next thing, I get 4, then 8 destroyers." "Soviet submarine reconnaissance?" Norman asked. "That's what I told him in Honolulu." Barnes grinned. "Part of the game to get what you need for an operation like this. You've got to know how to requisition equipment in the modern Navy. But, of course, the Soviets won't come around." "They won't?" Norman felt he had somehow missed the assumptions that lay behind the conversation and was trying to catch up. "It's very unlikely. Oh, they know we're here. They'll have spotted us with their satellites at least 2 days ago. But we're putting out a steady stream of decodable messages about our search and rescue exercises in the South Pacific. S&R drill represents a low priority for them, even though they undoubtedly figure a plane went down and we're recovering for real. They may even suspect that we're trying to recover nuclear warheads like we did off of Spain in '68, but they'll leave us alone, because politically they don't want to be implicated in our nuclear problems. They know we have troubles with New Zealand these days." "Is that what all this is?" Norman said. "Nuclear warheads?" "No," Barnes said. "Thank God. Anything nuclear, somebody in the White House always feels duty-bound to announce it. But we've kept this one away from the White House staff.
In fact, we bypassed the JCS on this. All briefings go straight from the Defense Secretary to the President personally. He rapped his knuckles on the desk. So far, so good, and you're the last to arrive. Now that you're here, we'll shut this thing down tight. Nothing in, nothing out. Norman still couldn't put it together. If nuclear warheads aren't involved in the crash, he said, why the secrecy? Well, Barnes said, we don't have all the facts yet. The crash occurred in the ocean? Yes, more or less directly beneath us as we sit here. And there can't be any survivors. Survivors? Barnes looked surprised. No, I wouldn't think so. Then why was I called here? Barnes looked blank. Well, Norman explained, I'm usually called to crash sites when there are survivors. That's why they put a psychologist on the team to deal with the acute traumatic problems of surviving passengers, or sometimes the relatives of surviving passengers, their feelings and their fears and their recurring nightmares. People who survive a crash often experience all sorts of guilt and anxiety concerning why they survived and not others. A woman sitting with her husband and children, suddenly they're all dead and she alone is alive, that kind of thing. Norman sat back in his chair. But in this case, an airplane that crashed in 1,000 feet of water, there wouldn't be any of those problems, so why am I here? Barnes was staring at him. He seemed uncomfortable. He shuffled the files around on his desk. Actually, this isn't an airplane crash site, Dr. Johnson. What is it? It's a spacecraft crash site. There was a short pause. Norman nodded. I see. That doesn't surprise you, Barnes said. No, Norman said. As a matter of fact, it explains a lot. If a military spacecraft crashed in the ocean, that explains why I haven't heard anything about it on the radio, why it was kept secret, why I was brought here the way I was. When did it crash? Barnes hesitated just a fraction before answering. As best we can estimate, he said, this spacecraft crashed 300 years ago. ULF. There was a silence. Norman listened to the drone of the air conditioner. He heard faintly the radio communications in the next room. He looked at the mug of coffee in his hand, noticing a chip on the rim. He struggled to assimilate what he was being told, but his mind moved sluggishly, in circles. 300 years ago, he thought. A spacecraft 300 years old. But the space program wasn't 300 years old, it was barely 30 years old. So how could a spacecraft be 300 years old? It couldn't be. Barnes must be mistaken. But how could Barnes be mistaken? The Navy wouldn't send all these ships, all these people, unless they were sure what was down there. A spacecraft, 300 years old. But how could that be? It couldn't be. It must be something else. He went over it again and again, getting nowhere, his mind dazed and shocked.